coaches. Blow the whistle, ay. Blow the whistle, ay. Blow the whistle, they can't hold a flame against you, ay. Blow the whistle, blow the whistle, ay. Blow the whistle, got the game, it ain't no issue, yeah. Blowing the whistle, I had enough with you, the championship, it is gone. Ain't listen to you, I can't give it to you, cause you don't know what I've been on. This is the Coaches Podcast, ripping up everything off that. Back to back is not.
What is going on, everybody? Welcome back into the Fantasy Coaches Podcast. I am your host, as always, guys, Coach Steve. We are back for another amazing episode today, guys. We are talking rookies once again, and don't worry, we won't be getting into a lot of conversation about free agency like we did last week. We will be talking a lot more about these rookies compared to the quarterbacks that were not as amazing to talk about last week, but the rookie tight ends, they're pretty good. There's a lot of them I like. I'm sure there's a lot Coach Tyler likes. And speaking of Coach Tyler, what is going on, Coach Tyler? Welcome into the show today.
What's up, guys? Yeah, tight ends were honestly, some of my favorite players to talk about last season, and we just got blessed with a huge group of athletes. So excited to jump into it today.
Absolutely, guys. So, like I said, there is some free agent to talk about, but it's not as much. There's a couple things that we missed from last week. I wouldn't say they're anything overly extended, but we had to talk about them, and then we will get into our top 11 or 12 tight ends or so from this rookie class here, and you have a nice in-depth analysis on a lot of these guys here. So without wasting any more time here, let's get into it here. All right. Starting off with the fantasy news updates. Starting off with, I'll just name off all three real quick, and then we'll talk about them. The three big news in terms of free agency so far since last week were Brandon Cook signs back with the Saints. That was the team he originally started off at with a 2-year deal. Jameis Winston signed with the Giants on a 2-year deal as well. And Tyler Conklin signs with the Chargers on a 1-year deal. So Coach Tyler, I'll let you kind of start off the free agency talk here. Talk about all three real quick.
Yeah, Brandon Cooks coming out of Dallas again. He signs with the Saints. They're going to need a number two. We had some variance in who the number two was going to be last year. And, we saw it was week to week. There was some booms, but especially once Chris Olave went down, you had some Rashid Shaheed. But outside of that, there was really a lot of questions. It was Taysom Hill for a couple weeks, and you just had a bunch of different guys popping in and out. So I think Brandon Cooks, at the least, gives you a good veteran presence. Obviously, spent a lot of his career with the Saints, spent a lot of time with them. And he comes in and is able to, help mature a really young room, especially, with the possibility of them adding another receiver in this class coming up. And so at the least, you're getting that veteran presence, but at the most, you're getting a solidified wide receiver too, who before his time in Dallas had, a great streak of 1,000-yard seasons. And, he hasn't looked too slow outside of that. And so I like the signing. I don't think it does a ton for his fantasy value. I don't think it really brings him into fantasy relevance per se, just especially dynasty-wise with the age and the, not having the knowledge of what the Saints offense is going to look like this next season. He doesn't hold a ton of fantasy relevance for me, but I think real football-wise, it's a good signing. Jameis Winston to the Giants. Everything here just screams Malik Neighbors is going to have the greatest receiver season of all time because Jameis is just going to throw it up to him as much as possible, and it's going to work out somehow. The door is still open, and there is still a lot of chatter about the Giants either, going in and signing another veteran quarterback, whether that be, continuing to pursue Aaron Rodgers or maybe even just a lower level backup behind Jameis Winston. But the chatter is still there of them. They have the 3rd overall pick, still taking whatever quarterback is available and catches their eye, which, most likely would be a Shedeur Sanders. And so even that signing gives Jameis Winston a good backup job. Shout out to Saquon for calling that one. But if Winston is the starter there, I still have him as a QB2. He's still very turnover prone. He still enjoys throwing it to the other team. But at the same time, I think that boosts Malik Neighbors a lot from where Daniel Jones was, because at least Jameis Winston is going to air it out to Malik Neighbors. And, a guy that we talked about last week with Darius Slayton, if Jameis Winston comes in and they don't draft a high-end running back, they're not running the ball. They're throwing it 50 times a game until Jameis breaks his 30 interception season record. But I like the signing for a lot more of the receivers and pass catchers around him. But, even on a minimal 2-year deal that he got, I want to say it was $4 million a year, if I remember it right. I don't think that he's going to necessarily have the solidified starting spot. That doesn't mean that he won't go out and compete for it in camp with a rookie or another veteran that they bring in. But if he is the starter, I think it boosts a lot of the receivers around him. But I still have him as a lower end QB2 for me. And then Tyler Conklin signing with the Chargers. The Chargers, Jim Harbaugh does like to use his tight ends. And I think that Conklin showed enough last year, obviously to get this deal, but to show that he can play a role in the offense and be a, formidable piece of the receiving game, especially with a lot of the play action that Harbaugh likes to run off of his, infamous run game. I think Conklin sets himself up well to go. And, Will Dissly is there. I don't know how much of a threat he is, but Conklin, had multiple wide receiver 1 weeks this past season on a, very poor Jets team. And so going into an offense that really likes to feature tight ends, as long as Harbaugh doesn't go out and get Colston Loveland, his tight end from his time in Michigan, then Conklin sets up to, have some, lower end tight end 2 value, or even to be propped up into that lower end tight end 1 range, depending on how much they genuinely use him in this pass game.
Yeah, no, I agree. That's a lot of great stuff right there. Let's see. Oh, Fantasy Dog just jumped in. What's up, Fantasy Dog? Just got here. Looks like Cooks is 20th round best ball. Good stuff here. Yeah, absolutely. Cooks is definitely going to be interesting. I know he hasn't really been, at the top of his game the last season or two, especially last year, obviously dealing with a lot of injuries. But the Saints organization, I doubt they're going to go early on with wide receiver because they have so many other needs that they need to get younger at right now. And the wide receiver probably isn't going to be one that they spend an early round pick on. So you're probably going to see Olave, Shaheed, and Brandon Cooks a lot of the times. And I think Cook can offer some great value, in redraft this season, obviously in best ball. He's could be very interesting just because the position is so injury prone that Brandon Cooks might find himself as the wide receiver 1 for more than half the season. Jameis Winston, again, this was a signing I think many people, especially those who own Malik Neighbors, really wanted to come there. Obviously, we know who Jameis Winston's talent is. We also know what his weakness is. It's going to be interesting to see what the Giants do with the draft picks. If they elect to go the quarterback route, I don't think Jameis has the longest leash ever. I think that if he ends up kind of fumbling the ball early on in the season, and I mean fumbling, I mean throwing lots of picks, they're going to go to the rookie because they need to find any way which to win this. This head coaching staff, this regime needs to find ways to win. Again, having like Russell Wilson still be there, I think that's still a possibility, but we'll have to wait and see for sure. But Winston is definitely, for those who are in Dynasty, you've got yourself a potential week 1 starter. We'll have to wait and see what the Giants do with the draft. And then Tyler Conklin. Yeah, Tyler Conklin's a fine tight end. He's been pretty solid with the Jets the last 3 or 4 years he's been there. I think he's got 500, 600 yards each of the last 4 seasons. Touchdowns have been pretty minimal, but that's what the Jets offense has been doing the last few years. If, they don't draft anyone like Coach Tyler said, Tyler Conklin is a sneaky sleeper tight end this year and someone I would be going after as a contender in Dynasty right now because he could end up having a really strong season. Will Dissly tried. Will Dissly, unfortunately, he missed his opportunity to be elite because he had chances in his early years. He just got hurt too much. So Tyler Conklin's going to come in and be able to, I think, secure that role from Will Dissly. And as long as they don't bring a rookie in, he looks pretty solid as a sleeper tight end this year. Fantasy Dog said, thank you guys for the information. 8 touchdowns in 2024. Must have been talking about Cooks. But yeah, So we're going to move on here. Again, there wasn't too many things for fantasy. Just a few things. Again, these aren't big signings, but they might have some, impact on our fantasy season. So let's get in the real juice here. Rookies now. Now, those who are, in dynasty leagues, or if you're, in your redraft leagues, you want to know about these rookies. Understand who they are as players, what they're good at, what they're not good at, and, take that with as much salt as you want, and then wait and see kind of where NFL teams draft them. But before that, we have to kind of talk about who they are as players. So, hold on. Fantasy Dog said something else. I got Conklin in the 20th of one draft so far. Nice. It's a great late round tight end to go and grab. So let's go into our first tight end. And now, compared to last week, guys, this is nicely in order. So if you're not listening on our YouTube channel, you should absolutely go and check it out. The Fantasy Coaches on YouTube. It's a great slideshow that I bring out every single week for us. And we're going to start right here at the top with, I think, a lot of people's top tight end in this class, especially my top tight end in this class here, Tyler Warren, tight end out of Penn State. This past season, 104 receptions. That's no joke to you. 104 receptions, 1,200 yards, and 8 touchdowns. He'll be 22 by the start of the season. Didn't test at the combine. I don't think his pro day happened just yet. I think it's going to be this week. So I'm hoping that he does maybe some other things. But again, he's almost locked on as the top tight end. I mean, I'm hearing him going in potentially the top 10. That's how many people love this guy. The speed and separation is just wildly unmatched for his position there. Again, something that those who like Brock Bowers a lot last year, very similar in terms of his ability to get down the field and find separation among defenders, whether it's linebackers or safeties. The route running, he runs routes very well. It looks like a pro out there running routes, and then having a tight end that can run all the routes is something that an NFL team can use as a weapon. He's got a big catch radius. He can kind of haul in a lot of different things, whether it's all to the side, up to you have to make a jump ball catch, whatever it is. Tyler Warren can make all these great catches here. Now, the only few things that about him that are a little, maybe not off per se, but hold on, there we go. Off per se is inconsistent blocking. Again, a lot of these tight ends are going to have somewhat of inconsistent blocking to some extent, unless they're a true pass blocking tight end. Again, it's not a big negative, but it is inconsistency that can be worked on. Contact through routes, I definitely noticed while watching some film on him that, he has kind of got knocked off his routes at time where, you look like he was supposed to do something else, and then the physical contact kind of forced him to kind of go a different direction. And then inconsistent play. It looks like at times while watching him on film that he kind of takes his foot off the gas. And I feel like this happens often with some of these higher prospects. Like I noticed that about Brock Bowers a little bit last year, but again, Brock Bowers showed us that he's an amazing tight end, obviously. So that doesn't really matter. A lot of these negatives, Tyler Warren, not that big of a deal. He'll make it work. It's the positives that you need to look out for Tyler Warren, and he's really good. But Coach Tyler, how do you feel about Tyler Warren? What did you see with him?
Yeah, I really like Tyler Warren. He was just a fun guy to watch. Shout out Fancy Dog for Coach Steve, does all the graphics. He does a great job with that. But yeah, Tyler Warren, I watched a lot of Penn State football this season because of Tyler Warren. He's just a fun guy to watch. And, in an offense that featured two, high-level running backs, these are two guys that are going to be near the top of the draft class next year with Nicholas Singleton returning. You would think that a tight end for Penn State would be, just a significant blocker and, run out in the flat for a couple plays. And, he wouldn't put up a stat line of 1,200 receiving yards and 8 touchdowns, right? Like, to have that kind of offensive production behind, two running backs, especially with a quarterback, we'll talk about it more next offseason. But depending on how you view Drew Aller, the fact that you had 1,200 receiving yards and 8 touchdowns from a quarterback like Drew Aller is still pretty good. But, you said it, right? He's just size-wise. He measured in at the combine 6'5.5", 260, or 256, so just under 260. He has, the size, and I think that is something that contributes to, that contact on plays when you got a, big man running downfield and you get a little bump, it's going to take you a second to get back on your line. So that's not necessarily something that I see as a major negative. I think that that's just, physics and how science plays out in that. But Tyler Warren really was a jack of all trades, right? You saw him go in, obviously, at the tight end position. They split him out wide multiple times. They had him come in as a fullback. They had him running wildcat and QB sneaks. Like, he was basically a Taysom Hill for the Penn State offense. And I love Lance Zierlein's comparison for him. It's what I love, partially because of how he looks on the football field and partially because it's just such a good comp, is Jeremy Shockey, right? He has a lot of this big, tough, physical, like, I will go out and win this ball type play. But even for a guy his size, he still has that speed and separation, right? He has the route running ability, right? He can beat guys in man, and he can definitely beat you in zone. He's smart enough to sit down where he needs to sit down. And, like I said, Penn State is, the bulk of their offense runs behind two really good running backs. So Tyler Warren on the field, a decent amount was blocking, but we see it with guys like Brock Bowers. We see it with guys like Sam Laporta, these guys that, have blocking ability. It may not be, the top blocking tight end in the league, but unless you get blocking points in fantasy, I could care less, because with a tight end that's supposedly going to get top 12, 15, 20 draft capital, they're not getting him to go block for a running back, right? He might have to do it on a couple plays, but they're getting him out there to go give them an offensive advantage and go win the plays, win themselves games. And so with his size and his speed and his production, right, his ability to really go anywhere on the field, teams are going to see that and fall in love with him, right? They're going to utilize him in, I don't want to say fully a way that Taysom Hill is utilized, but he has that ability to go out and be the fullback and take a fullback dive on the goal line, right? He has the ability to go be a wildcat quarterback if they needed, on top of doing all the things at an elite level that a tight end needs to do. So I have him as my one. He's a guy that's like not only fun to watch from a scouting perspective, but fun to watch play football, because he puts his head down, he goes and runs you over, and it's awesome to see. So I have him as my one. I love him as the one. And I'm really excited to see him hopefully go anywhere but the Indianapolis Colts, where I've seen him.
I was just going to say that. Please don't go to the Colts. Anywhere but the Colts, I'll be perfectly happy with. So, all right. On to our second tight end, or at least my second tight end. This is kind of in my order to some extent here. Colston Loveland, tight end out of Michigan here. My second tight end off my board currently right now. Early on, summary on him, you look at a guy that I think will be a focal point of an offense one day, very athletic. This past season, 56 receptions, not the 110 that he was last year. 582 receiving yards and 5 touchdowns. Fantasy Dog did say something. Is he only 240 pounds? Don't know.
Loveland or Warren?
Yeah, let us know. Loveland or Warren?
Warren was 256 at official measurement, and Loveland's 248. So he's right there on that.
Yeah. Exactly. All right. He'll be 21 years old by the start of the season here. Didn't test at the combine. Did have surgery in January to repair an AC joint this offseason here. So he may take a little bit more time than some people might like, coming off an injury and surgery this offseason. So you probably haven't seen him do any real testing or anything like that. He didn't do, obviously, I believe, any testing at Michigan's Pro Day. So, but Loveland's an interesting one, and he's been talked about he's saying Warren. Hold on.
Warren was 256 at his it was, let me look. It was either 256 or 258 at the combine.
He's saying, wow, 256.
256,
wow.
Yes.
All right. So, yeah, back to Loveland here. There's definitely been talks about him being a very high-end tight end. He's also being mocked very often to the first round of NFL drafts here, and, rightfully so. There's definitely some things that, obviously put Warren above Loveland for me, but Loveland's really great. The one thing I do like about him, and he kind of gives me some kind of George Kittle vibes to some extent, where, he's got really good blocking ability. And I think that could be his slight downfall, where he could be used to block very often, but he's got the ball skills to go out there and make catches. And then once he has those catches, make yards after the catch be his weapon of choice, beating these defenders on the NFL field here. It was really fun to watch him here. You would expect that, based on how I talk about him, that he would have more in terms of production, but he was really good this past season. Obviously, injuries kind of hurt his 2024 season a little bit there, but he is really dynamic and a lot of big things that he can do. Again, some things that I saw a little bit more on the negative side. I'd love to see, strength. Again, I don't really see that as a big negative all the time because you can build that. You can easily build into strength, and he will once he gets onto a NFL team there. Dealt kind of with some struggles with contested catches. The initial burst off the line there, he's not gonna, blow people away that I think Tyler Warren can off the line of scrimmage there. And then footwork, a little sloppy at times when running some routes, but besides that, I mean, this is a guy who can be a weapon for an NFL team, and I'm really excited about Colston Loveland. He should be very interesting at the next level here. But Coach Tyler, how do you feel about Colston Loveland?
Yeah, I really like Colston Loveland. He is, you wouldn't guess it by his 56 and 582, but you turn on the film of this guy, and he is just a big wide receiver running out of the tight end position. He doesn't have that blazing speed. Like you said, his footwork, both blocking and route running, there are things to be polished. He's not a, perfect prospect, but he is fun to watch, and he does a lot of things well. I think that he is going to get into a little bit of trouble with his blocking once it comes to, NFL type players. Obviously the Big Ten, you had a couple guys coming off the line that he's played against that either are in the NFL or are projected to be very decent players in the NFL. And those are the guys that he's struggled with. And, it makes sense from the perspective of if you're going up against NFL guys every week in college, you might not be perfect. And that's exactly how it happened, right? But he has the size and the length to go out and be, like you said, like a George Kittle, right? Official combine measurements, he was 6'6", 248. So he's got the size, right? He's a little bit, I would say, slimmer than a Tyler Warren. Obviously, about 10 pounds lighter, half an inch taller, most likely going to elongate, that kind of stuff. But, he has had pretty consistent production over the past 2 years. Obviously, if you watched Michigan football this year, it was not the same as when Jim Harbaugh was there. But he did have, more looks, more receptions than he had while Harbaugh was there. And so the offense really, when they got in a pinch, they leaned on him. And that's exactly what, he needs to be. He needs to be a guy that can be leaned on, but at the same time, he's a guy that's going to grow and mature once he gets into the league. All right. There's a lot of things that he can polish off and he needs to polish off, but he's going to be a 21-year-old by the start of the league, like by the start of the season. He's got time. He can figure it out. And that shoulder surgery, he'll be okay. I think he's healing up. I want to say he's competing at their pro day.
No, I don't think he did.
He didn't do pro day?
They already had their pro day. I think it was last week. I don't think he participated.
I thought they were still coming up on that. But, the shoulder injury, he's not going to have to go through contact until OTAs. That gives it plenty of time to heal, plenty of time for him to rehab. But like I said, you watch him, you turn it on, he plays like just a large wide receiver out there. Looks a little bit like Harold Carmichael running around. He goes up and he gets the ball. He uses all of that 6'6" to go up and pluck the ball out of the air, and he's strong. He's got really strong hands to come down with it, to fight off defenders as he's catching in traffic. And I really like him as the two. This is a very loaded tight end class, and to have Colston Loveland as, the two is not a diminishing number for him, but it's a great number in terms of how many other guys we're going to talk about that could be, consistent NFL producers over the next 5 years.
Yeah, absolutely. Again, this is a really strong class here. So if you're looking for tight ends or you're trying to understand the tight end position, looking for more young guys to come up, this is going to be a great class that can change the landscape here of the tight end position. So next guy on the board, man, Harold Fannin Jr., tight end out of Bowling Green College here. Oh, man, this guy is like someone who can just be electric for the position here. This past season, 117 receptions, even more than Tyler Warren this past year, 1,500 yards and 10 touchdowns. He also will be 21 by the start of the NFL season. Really solid combine, 4.72 40, 4.39 shuttle. That was really good. Decent broad jump at 118. But Fannin, he was really fun to watch on tape there. The speed, the route level that he offers at being able to kind of run all the routes, being very crafty in space, finding the open area on a lot of different coverages. Fannin was someone I really like to watch. Kind of uses just a total weapon for Bowling Green here. I mean, versatility. You talk about Tyler Warren. This guy was used all over the place on the field there, using the backfield, used out wide, used on the line. Like they used him in every which way. And once he got the ball in his hand, he could just take it. It was fun to watch him. Again, he kind of reminded me of like a big wide receiver, kind of like a Jonnu Smith back in his early days, kind of like a big play tight end that was just like he'd take the big one to the house. Or when Jonnu Smith used to like take end arounds and just run up the field there, that kind of reminded me of Fannin a little bit there. Real exciting prospect to watch. Negatives, though, blocking. Again, I didn't see a lot of blocking. They probably won't use him as much as a blocking tight end. Per se, he's going to be kind of like Mike Gesicki, where Mike Gesicki's just kind of out wide very often than not. Contact, very similar to Warren, where I kind of saw that when he got a little contact on him, things kind of didn't pan out as great for him. And then speed in the second level, he was able to get up the field pretty quickly, but then kind of faded as he got into those deeper levels of the field there, especially on his routes. But outside of that, I mean, there weren't too many things I really was, oh man, I don't know about him. He looked amazing to watch on the field there. Great catcher. And I'm excited to see what Coach Tyler has to say about him.
Yeah, Harold Fannin, he is one of those guys. For me, I don't know 1,000% how I feel about him. Like you said, 117 receptions, 1555 receiving yards. If he had that in receiving touchdowns, he'd be number one overall. 1555 receiving yards. He has all the stats to back it up, but there's, a couple things that really stick out to me that somewhat drive him down my board. He has the production, but he is a little bit smaller, right? The last couple guys we talked about, 6'5" and a half, 258, 6'6", 248. Harold Fannin Jr. comes in at 6'3", 241. So he's a little bit, if you want to call it the smaller side of a tight end. It's really hard to say that anyone is small, but smaller side of a tight end. And, like Coach Steve said, that speed at the second level, we saw a 4.71 40 out of the tight end, which is, a fairly good time. It's not bad at all. But, that is kind of 65, 70th percentile, if I remember it right. So, he's in the upper half of tight ends, but he's not blazing past anyone. Right. And like you said, his route levels are good. Like he can make it happen at every route level. He can go short. He can work intermediate. He can even get deep. But there's just not enough craftiness at his size to really wow me. Right. He's very, straight line guy, and it obviously worked in the MAC. I don't know if that's going to translate exactly to the NFL.
That's another issue. Yeah.
Level
of competition.
Yeah. The level of competition. He was playing in the MAC. Shout out Maction. Always fun to watch midweek, but at his size, I would want to see him be a little bit more crafty on his routes. And he's just very, straight line oriented. Not a lot of bend, not a lot of outstanding footwork to get necessarily open against higher level talents. And then that size does come in to hurt him. Like you said, blocking and contact. That size doesn't help him when he doesn't have the footwork craftiness to get outside of a, closer up linebacker, right? If he's somehow sitting in press, it's hard for him to get out of those situations and to really establish his route where he wants it. And so I like Harold Fannin Jr. He is a guy that intrigues me. He's also a guy that's almost impossible for me to rank because I see those stats and I say, wow, this is a guy that anyone should want on their team.
Yeah.
But then I look at, who he was competing against and doing it against. Not that level of competition is everything, but when we talk about, the Big Ten tight ends that are putting up 1,200 numbers, that stands a little bit higher to me than 1,500 in the MAC. especially when, there's different nuances that he's going to need to learn and polish up in the league to get to that precipice that people want him to be at, right? He's not someone that I think is going to be a sleeper by any means. I think he has too much name value, Mackey Award winner, nation's best tight end this season. So he has, the acclaim. He has obviously the numbers. And so he's not going to be a guy that's falling late in your drafts unless he falls late in the actual NFL draft.
Which would be surprising for me.
Yeah. But I see some things that I would want to rather pay up for in a season or two when I see him improve and see him really solidify a position and solidify those spots on a depth chart, than take the shot at hoping that he reaches that potential and miss out with, say a second round pick this season.
Right. Shout out to Fantasy Dog. Thank you for saying those kind words to us. We appreciate it. But Fannin is definitely, I think, it could be a difference maker if he lands in the right situation. So over to our next tight end here, Gunnar Helm, tight end out of Texas. Early on, summary of him, kind of a tight end that can do a little bit of everything to some extent. I'll talk more about that in a few, but Helm this season, 60 receptions, 786 yards, and 7 touchdowns. A little older there. He'll be 23 by the start of the season. Unfortunately, he was the worst tester at the NFL Combine, a 4.4840, a 30-inch vertical jump, a 7.15 three cone, which in terms of the history that I did on the NFL Combine, that's like death for a tight end. But he did suffer an ankle injury at the Combine, so there could be, some reasoning behind some of these bad performance or testing, you could say. So we'll have to wait and see on that. But Helm is definitely a very interesting tight end here. Early on things I really do like about him that he did block very well, really good blocker. He was able to kind of play against some of the best that he had to go up against, consistently being able to stay up on his blocks and handle that kind of situations. Really strong hands. Again, he got the ball a good amount and was able to bring in lots of different balls in from different areas, and body control, able to adjust to the ball. Whoever was throwing the ball to him at times, whether it was Manning or if it was Coyers, he was able to kind of be like a nice safety blanket for them underneath. And that's kind of what he was. He was a really an underneath wide receiver. That's kind of the one of the things I didn't necessarily like about him per se, in terms of thinking of long-term fantasy value. But as a prospect, it was solid. But in terms of thinking fantasy, he didn't see a lot of deep balls. Again, he didn't probably need to with the wide receivers they had there, but he was kind of just used on shorter routes, didn't really stretch the field, it's not a weapon downfield, essentially. Speed, again, whether the 40 time was a situation to his injury, just didn't look all that fast while watching him on film. It looked kind of slow coming off the ball, especially when he got kind of knocked around at times. And then contested catches, didn't always consistently bring them in. When he had somebody on him hard, it was just, things didn't really end up well with that ball, unfortunately. But kind of a tight end that I think a lot of people were high on prior to the NFL Combine. And then me at least, not me because I didn't watch film until after the Combine. But, hearing about him at the Combine, I was wanting to see they talk about so poorly how he did. I wanted to see how he was. And I was like, he was fine. He was not bad. He was a really solid tight end overall. And that's kind of what I summarized about him, is that kind of did a little bit of everything, but didn't consistently do anything truly great in my eyes. So that's kind of how I see Gunnar Helm. But Coach Shot, how do you feel about the tight end Texas?
Yeah, Gunnar Helm, like you said, he did a lot of little things right. The way I would categorize him is like the old school pro style tight end. Good blocker. He obviously, blocks for some really good running backs in his time at Texas. But when he had to get open, he could. And a lot of that was utilized within the college football playoff. You see a lot of his film from those couple games, or those few games, really show up as, he just kind of ends up alone in a lot of these random situations, right? These different plays. And he is, an intelligent tight end, right? He's one that knows how to read the zone. He knows how to sit where he needs to sit. And he knows how to get through, either blockers or defenders to get to where he needs to be for the quarterback to meet him, right? Obviously played with Quinn Ewers a lot of this time and did benefit from a lot of vertical threats in the offense, guys like Isaiah Bond, guys like Matthew Golden, guys that were driving, a lot of corners and safeties downfield to open up that middle part. But like you said, he just does a lot of things. He does a lot of little things well, but he doesn't do anything, outstanding, right? I see him more as, the traditional tight end. I keep looking at these player comps. Lance Zierlein comped him to Jake Ferguson, right?
Yeah.
Jake Ferguson's not blowing anyone away from a fantasy value standpoint, but he does a lot of the little things really well. And that's exactly what I see from Gunnar Helm right here, right? And he's got, for the most part, the size, 6'5", 241. So a little bit on that, quote, lighter side weight-wise, but he's got the height, he's got the arm length, he's got the, catch radius, but he's also a very good blocker. So I think teams are going to fall in love with the, all-around ability of Gunnar Helm. I don't think it, projects him up to be a tight end 1 anytime soon in fantasy for you. But I think he is a good tight end that spent a lot of years, putting consistent production on tape at a now SEC school. And, teams are going to like that, level of competition and the ability to both block and get out downfield and go make a catch. They're going to really like, the dual ability of a tight end that's almost kind of gone away with the more elite level tight ends in our eyes.
Absolutely. All right, let's head over to our next tight end. Helms was my tight end 6, so this isn't completely in order. He's my tight end 6, so on my rankings currently. So, but Elijah Arroyo, tight end out of the U of Miami here. One of Cam Ward's weapons here. My summary. I always forget my summary little thing. Upside tight end, but has some pass injury concerns. That's something that kind of summarized about him. But this past season, 35 receptions, 590 receiving yards, and 7 touchdowns. 22 years old by the start of the season. Did not test at the combine. I think the U's pro day is this week or today. Was it today or this next couple?
I think Cam Ward's throwing right now. So
okay, so they're throwing right now. So he's probably likely on the field somewhere right now, showing off his testing numbers. So. But Arroyo was really interesting to watch as well. He's someone who's been rising up the board since the Senior Bowl. Again, not my board because I had already had him high after watching and hearing what I already heard about him. But he definitely was someone I think since the Senior Bowl has risen up a lot of people's boards, and there's good reasons why. Again, another weapon kind of tight end, has that speed there. And I really would hope that he does the 40-yard because that will, I think, help his overall case to be a higher end tight end on the board there. But speed was a big thing. Find the ability to separate from defenders there. He was consistently being able to do that while watching film on him, whether it was, straight lines downfield or if it was shorter area passes. He was consistently able to find separation. Good hands, brought a lot of great balls in. Again, 35 receptions. Didn't see a billion balls in the air from him, but he was able to bring in a lot of good things. Strong hands, being able to bring in things at times where, it was a little bit hard to do, whether it was too high or whether it was contested catching. He was able to bring in the ball, which shows off some great handwork there. Choppy route running. That was some towards of the negative side of things. He wasn't a polished route runner. Very choppy at times when you're looking at his route running. Definitely something that he needs to improve on for his own ability there. Blocking. He wasn't much of a blocker in my eyes. There's definitely times where, you consistently see him get beat by defenders as he's trying to block them, or kind of just misses his assignment a little bit. Definitely something that needs to kind of improve. And finally, the injuries. He was able to play, well this past season here. Got in 13 games, but the prior 2 years, he only played 11 games or so, or less, based on the stats that I'm seeing here. But he wasn't really involved until this season here. And, they do talk about at times where a prospect who's a little older, not say super old or anything, but that doesn't break out until his final year. It carefully can say, oh, well, you couldn't compete with the best, but you can beat the younger guys now that you're a little bit older and more experienced. So I've heard that happen before to a lot of tight ends there. But Aurora is definitely really interesting. I have him as my tight end fourth time, just because I love that the weapon that he offers for the next level there, and I'm hoping the right team does get to him and able to sign him up, but we'll have to wait and see on that. But Coach Tyler, how do you feel about Arroyo?
Yeah, so official word is Arroyo isn't doing any athletic testing today, so we won't get 40s or anything. What I read, it's not injury concern, anything. It's just
doesn't want to hurt him.
Played his cards right because he probably ran a couple 40s and realized it wouldn't help his stock at all. But, Arroyo he definitely benefited from having Cam Ward this past season, and I think that's where, he really shined in terms of his ability to, one, beat zone defenses, and two, be a great scramble partner for Cam Ward, right? Miami's offensive line wasn't that outstanding, and Cam Ward does have a tendency to hold the ball a little long from time to time. And so there was a lot of scramble drill that Arroyo ended up being that main target for him because he was able to find the openings. He was able to be exactly where he needed to be for Ward to get that ball out and then go make a play, right? And, the injury concerns do kind of pop up, like you said, dealt with injuries, missed, time through the past 2 seasons with knee injuries. And so I would be interested to see what the medicals look like. Obviously nothing came up at the combine, but as teams do their own things, prepping for the draft, I'll be interested to see if anything comes out with that. But I think he's just a high IQ tight end. Like you said, he has speed. Obviously, we would like to have an exact number to go with that.
Be nice.
But I want to say, if I remember it right, with the, modern day technology, he hit 21.5 miles an hour this past season as his top speed.
Sure.
So, at his size, he came in at 6'5", 250. So hitting 21 miles an hour at that size is outstanding. I would need to go back and look at the video of it to see how long he sustained that speed. But, he has the ability to accelerate and work up into that speed. The acceleration isn't as quick as I would like. He does have to kind of get it going. But when he does, he's able to, get both in a good position to block. He has some decent, like you said, inconsistent, but even his inconsistent blocking is still, fairly decent. And he has the ability to wall off defensive ends and outside backers coming in. But if he is able to end up in a situation where he's facing a lot of zone defense, a lot of teams that are trying to play quarterbacks with zone defense, I think he is going to be in a great position for himself. I don't think he's going to be, the tight end one for a team. I think he's going to slot in as a nice tight end two, possibly work his way up or work his way through injury with that. But there's still a lot of things that we would like to see before we do our drafts. And hopefully we do get, obviously we're not going to get that athletic testing unless he just puts out a video of himself doing it on his own. Missed the combine, not doing pro day. So we don't have those numbers that we would like to chew on, which makes me feel like the numbers wouldn't be great or he would have, gone out there and competed. But he's helping his draft stock and, you can't blame him for playing a smart move on that. But as he visits these teams, they're going to have their team doctors and physicians go through and do these medical tests so that they know exactly what they're getting. And I would be more than surprised if nothing comes out in any of those medical tests if something were to arise. And so I would like to see that before I, invest in him.
Right.
I think his tie to Cam Ward possibly sends him where Cam Ward is. So, with everything pointing towards Cam Ward going to Tennessee, it wouldn't surprise me if the Titans spent a later round pick on Elijah Arroyo.
Hey-o. Predicting now.
Cam that guy. If he stays tied to Cam, I wouldn't hate the idea of him having that scramble drill guy because I don't think that's anything they knock out of him, at least within the first season. So I don't have any major qualms with Arroyo, but he's also not someone that, jumps off the paper to me as like, wow, I need this guy on my fantasy team because he'll produce anywhere.
Gotcha. All right. Next up on our board. Wrong button. All right. Mason Taylor, tight end out of LSU. If you don't know Mason Taylor, he is the son of former NFL star Jason Taylor. So big Dolphins fan. Love me some Mason Taylor here. Ascending tight end. This past season, 55 receptions, 546 yards, just 2 touchdowns. But he'll only be 21 years old by the start of the season here. Didn't test at the combine, and I believe LSU's combine pro day is this coming week here. So Mason Taylor, some early things I liked about this guy here when watching film on him. Runs routes really well. Is able to make all the routes that he needs to make at all 3 levels of the field here. Really sharp route runner, really polished. Contested catching. This past season, watching him play on film, he's able to bring in a lot of things. He's tough. He's tough when it comes to that kind of stuff there. In terms of being able to get that ball and deal with the defender on him, and then body control. Watching his ability to kind of just adjust to the ball in his own way while kind of running around there was really great to watch on film there. Again, I think just a solid tight end overall. He's not an elite athlete, but he is a really strong in some of the more polished things I like to watch on him. Negative wise, I wrote physical blocking. It's 2 separate words on here, but physical blocking. While he handled contested catches very well, watching him block, not the same feature. Saw him either, kind of get beat more often than I wanted to see for a tight end who, showed while catching the ball can be physical, but blocking, completely different thing there. Something that could knack him at the next level, which I would not want to see, obviously, just because he's a fan favorite of mine. And more of like just a 1-speed runner, all his routes were, his run speed was essentially the same. Like there was no change in speed at all. He's running a little out route, same speed as running a 9 all the way down. It wasn't anything different watching him do that. And I think that could hurt him at the next level. Just being able to just kind of mismatch himself from defenders. So Mason Taylor, definitely an interesting tight end. He's my tight end 5 right now, just because I like him as a route runner. I like that he's able to, I think he'll be able to, at the next level, be able to, really be a weapon for a team if some of the other things that he needs to work on kind of can get fixed to some extent. But we'll have to wait and see about him. I hope he lands with the Dolphins, to be honest. I think it's a great spot to go to Miami, bring a legacy back to Miami, and someone that we could use a tight end to on this team. So, but Coach Tyler, how do you feel about Mason Taylor?
Yeah, I like Mason Taylor. Obviously, I like the pedigree of the bloodline. Jason Taylor, his uncle is Zach Thomas, who, Texas Tech guy, Hall of Famer, also big Dolphins legend. So Miami would really be smart for ticket sales and jersey sales to keep that in the family. But like you said, Mason Taylor is a 1-speed guy. And, he does have an advanced route tree. I do like route running and the positives there, but he's not necessarily crafty with that route tree, right? Almost a straight line, like I was talking about with Harold Fannin. He's very, if you give him an out route, he is going to cut it at exactly 90 degrees, and there's not going to be a question about it. He's going to put his foot in the ground and get out. And so, that's not a bad thing. He does it well. But there's not necessarily craftiness where, obviously he's going against a lot of SEC secondary and a lot of SEC talent is going to end up in the NFL. But there's guys that are able to study up on him at the next level that are going to be able to see, his exact tendencies right there and jump those routes a lot more. And so, 1-speed guy with a lack of craftiness in his route running. Obviously, I would think that NFL teams are going to, add a little bit of speed and acceleration to him. But I think one of the biggest things for Taylor to advance and take that next step is to polish up that route running, right? Be more crafty, learn how to control his speeds in and out of breaks, not necessarily to slow down, but to know, be more deceptive with that. And that is where I see him taking those steps. The blocking, I agree with, and it really confuses me because your dad is a Hall of Fame defensive end and your uncle is a Hall of Fame linebacker. I don't know why you haven't been running through more blocking drills for literally your entire life. There's no one better to go against in those one-on-one home reps. But, yeah, the blocking could improve, a lot better technique. It wasn't necessarily something that was used at LSU as much. They like to obviously throw the ball a little bit more, especially as they've seen Nussmeier grow and ascend a little bit. But he does have, his one speed isn't a bad speed at all. He is a very athletic tight end, and he does, hold the size. We keep throwing size out there. 6'5", 251, right? A lot of these guys are built just about the same, and that's what makes it so hard to rank them and find different things that we love and hate about them, because they're basically one person does one thing better, but they do the other thing worse. And so, I really like Mason Taylor. I do think there's not a lot of things. I do think there's things that he's going to need to polish and work on at the next level. But I also think that whatever team takes him on understands that. Whatever team drafts him understands that. And they will use that to their advantage of, hey, we can craft this guy into the type of receiver that we need, but also, get him in the blocking positions where we need him to be a sustainable blocker for our team.
Absolutely. All right. So going over to our next tight end here, another former Dolphin legacy kind of. There we go. Help me out with this one a little bit, Tyler. I'm gonna butcher his name, but I'm gonna try to do it anyway here. Oronade Gadsden, right?
I'm gonna be honest. I don't know how to pronounce it, but I would go with Oronade Gadsden.
Oronade Gadsden. Thank you so much. Appreciate that. Oronade Gadsden, tight end out of Syracuse here. His dad was a former wide receiver for the Miami Dolphins, and I think the Dallas Cowboys at one point of his career there. But Gadsden, this past season, 73 receptions, 934 yards, 7 touchdowns. He will be 22 years old by the start of the 2025 season. Not a great combine, 114 broad jump, 4.5640, which was pretty solid at his pro day. But there is something that's probably one of the fastest times for a tight end. But he was a wide receiver through a good portion of his NFL career and turned tight end. Not NFL career, but in college, he was a wide receiver, turned tight end. So, if you're looking at a wide receiver numbers, the 4.640 doesn't sound great, but as for a tight end, that's pretty fast. That's pretty solid overall. So the switch to tight end made a lot of sense for his opportunity to thrive at the NFL level there. Early things about him, great catch radius. I mean, as a wide receiver, you need to have that. That was one big thing. A lot of his traits are wide receiver heavy, showing that his ability to be a weapon in catching the ball, yards after the catch was really great. Contested catch situations there. Great speed to his game overall, watching him on the field there. And, he had big production. Again, part of it was because he was wide receiver, but he had, five games this past season, over 100 yards. Knows how to create separation, really strong hands when catching the ball there. A lot of good things about his ability as a weapon downfield. Now, the issues come if he wants to be a complete tight end or the blocking. Kind of blocks like a wide receiver. Not great for being more than in line, having to deal with bigger guys you're going to have to deal with on a week-to-week or game-to-game basis. Definitely very handsy, which I think could hurt his chances on being a full-time starter at the next level. Just like Mason Taylor, one-speed runner, consistently the same speed. Yeah, it was solid, but it was a consistent one-speed area. And being able to adjust to the ball and make those adjustments when the ball comes down his way, very inconsistent. Did not show the growth as a wide receiver to be able to do that. And now he's a tight end. So there's reasons behind his switch. I think it has to do more with speed and whatever else he chose to. I couldn't find out why he switched to tight end, but I'm sure some of it has to do with his ability in having that elite speed. But as a pass catcher, really strong. The other things that involve you being an actual tight end, he needs to work on if he wants to make it at the next level. But really interesting tight end. But Coach, how do you feel about Gladden?
Yeah, you look at the things that we're going to go with Gadsden. Well, you look at the thing that Gadsden does well. And, you see a lot of the receiver conversion part of that, right? He does the receiver things well, right? The catch radius, the yards after catch, the contested catches. But all the negatives, make it seem like there's a reason he was moved to tight end, and it's because he doesn't do any of the receiver tendencies still pop up, right? With his blocking, he blocks like a receiver does. And so that's really hard when you're putting him at the tight end position to, utilize him as a tight end, even with, how little some tight ends are blocking these days and how much more they're going out on routes. But it's weird because Gadsden moves like a tight end trying to be a wide receiver. And it doesn't work as well, right? Like he runs very tight. Like you said, 1-speed runner, you watch him trying to get in and out of breaks and it just feels slow. Like it just feels tight. It feels like he doesn't have that movement. And so, obviously you look at him and he's 6'5", 243. So he's got some size to him. So it makes sense why there's a little bit slower movements in that. But there's still, a lot of trying to get in and out of breaks that really pushes me off of Gadsden. Fun fact from the research, his dad, like you said, Dolphin, great wide receiver, did catch Dan Marino's final pass. So there's your Dolphins fun fact of the day. But I don't see the allure for him because he does a lot of the receiver things like a tight end, but does a lot of the tight end things like a receiver. And so it just creates this weird mesh of, he wasn't fast enough or agile enough to play receiver, but he, slotted in decently well at tight end, but he still, blocked like a receiver and, wasn't able to make a lot of different moves like a receiver. And so he's just a confusing prospect to me. I think having a father that was a professional pass catcher in the league does help. Especially, like we said with the the Dolphins connections, maybe the Dolphins still have that relationship with Gadsden, take a shot on him and say, we'll see how he does throughout camp. But he's not someone that I'm really, overly excited about. He does, he is a fairly good route runner. Like I just said, it's those breaks. It's just harder to beat NFL talent compared to ACC secondaries and linebackers. So he has the ability to do something in the league. I don't necessarily know exactly what it's going to be. I don't see him being, a solidified starter at the next level, but, I'm all for him to prove me wrong on that.
No, I agree with you. He's my tight end 9 right now, and it's fallen throughout the last month or so of my ranking. So I would probably see him outside of my top 10 in the next month or so as I continue to do some research on some of these guys there. But Gadsden's got the receiving talent to some extent, but he's got a lot of work to do to make it to the next level. All right. Next guy on the board here, Terrace Ferguson, tight end out of Oregon. Early thing about him, summarize production as a pass catcher, lacks blocking. That's kind of my summary in terms of Terrace Ferguson. 43 receptions, 591 yards, 3 touchdowns, 22 by the start of the season. Decent NFL combine, a poor broad jump with a 112, but a good vertical jump at 39. So it was kind of like he was hot and cold on certain things. So when it comes to Ferguson, again, another guy that I like as a pass catcher in a general sense, and it's good for obviously fantasy, but he's got the speed, he's got the route running ability. He can run a lot of the great routes there. Thank you, Coach. Thank you, Fantasy Dog. Appreciate that. Ball skills. He looks like a really good route runner and a good receiver in general in the passing game. They have really good stuff on that. Can be used, I think, as a good weapon at the NFL level there. Again, he needs to be kind of schemed to more open. If they can get him open in space, he can do a lot of damaging at the NFL level. Because some of the negatives, when you look at him, blocking. Again, wasn't a great blocker. Really struggled at times as a blocker. Being very physical. Physical, that was, for me, a key thing. That's why I think that he was better as a guy that could get open on his own and not have to, fight off the line of scrimmage and try to make a play, because that usually never worked for him. Anytime he had a block first and then go out on his route, kind of like came off real slow. And even in his route running ability, if the defender was kind of on him and kind of pushing him around a little bit, didn't really work out watching him on film there. But him open in space, I loved. And then some of the quickness, and that means, when I mean quickness, I mean just a short area where, again, kind of like if he kind of got fumbled off his route, he couldn't kind of regain his speed right away. It kind of took him more time than coming off the initial start of the play or start of his route. It's kind of how I see it. I mean, again, I think he's a better pass catching tight end than he is all around tight end. And then a lot of these guys have a lot of great pass catching ability. He had solid production in college. So, Coach Chow, how do you feel about Ferguson?
Yeah, when you turn on the tape, you watch Ferguson and you just watch Oregon in general, right? Ferguson to me just looked like another wide receiver that was out there. Obviously, he was a lot bigger than most of the receivers that Oregon was putting out there. You compare him to a Tez Johnson; those are two different guys. But 6'5", 247, so he has the size. And like I said, he looked like just another receiver out there. That does come into play with, that negative of the blocking and even a little bit of the physical. But he was a consistent, pass catcher for Oregon. Obviously, a very well-schemed offense. Ferguson wasn't really asked or coached to do anything too far downfield. And so a lot of his production came in the short area. It was a very, quick game, just get downfield, we'll get you open type thing. And so, there are some things that teams are going to really not like about him, right? There is the explosiveness, that, 11-2 broad jump. He's not, getting out. He can get vertical, that 39-inch vert jump, but he's not getting out, right? There isn't a ton of explosiveness. And you see that especially when it comes to his route running, right? Not asked to do a ton downfield. And when you go through and you watch him try and work downfield, or you go watch his combine workout, you see a lot of it is because it looks like he stomps when he's trying to come to a, break. He plays very heavy footed. And so he's not, like, you have that negative on there, quickness. He's not outstandingly quick, both himself and his footwork. Right. And then he just doesn't really make a huge effort to block. And when he does, it does never really work out well.
No, it doesn't.
Yeah. So he is, he's a capable pass catcher. I really think that teams are going to just have him slot in as a guy that is running those underneath routes. If anything, there's obviously a lot that can get polished and matured up as he, enters the league and goes and does all these things with more advanced coaching and more prominent people around him. But at the same time, he has the pass catcher ability, and that's really what we want in fantasy. So that's really what I look at. I just think teams are going to maybe push him down the board compared to other tight ends, because his negative of blocking ranks a lot higher for both of us than a lot of the other tight ends we've had that negative of blocking for.
That's fair. A lot of these tight ends have a negative of blocking to some extent, but they have a lot of great ability as a pass catcher. It's just really interesting. So, all right, 3 more tight ends we're going to go over real quick here. Next up is a Jake Bringstool, tight end out of Clemson. Am I saying it right? Bringstool, right?
Bringstool.
All right. Bringstool. Out of Clemson, 49 receptions, 530 yards, 7 touchdowns. Will be 22 by the start of the NFL season here. Not a great combine, 31-inch vertical, 115 broad jump. Early things to kind of mention about him, which I took it off my screen here now. Great. Hold on a second. Of course, I don't know why I put that screen away, but all right. Where is he at here? Lacks the size, but makes up for his toughness. And the size is a big thing. He, he's like big, but like he's just like too big. I feel like from my eyes when looking at him, I feel like he's just an over giant tight end. Where I feel like it kind of makes him a little bit more less of a true weapon. It's more of like a bulky big guy. But I like him as an athlete. I think he's a pretty solid athlete for his size. Ball skills are really strong. He comes on really strong as a pass catcher. While watching film on him, a lot of good things that he's able to do with the ball in his hands. He's a good route runner, runs all the routes pretty well. Trying to think what else off the top of my head there for him. I mean, he's someone I really did like. I feel like someone who I think if being coached up right can really make an impact at the next level here. I have him as my tight end 7 currently right now. I feel like there's just a lot of good things about his game that are very interesting. The only thing, ball skills, speed, the blocking is decent, able to kind of, what I like about him the most is that his ability kind of to fake out defenders, be able to kind of give them misdirection and sell his routes really well. I feel like that can offer him his ability to be a weapon at the next level and be kind of a focal point for an offense to some extent. But again, there are negatives about him. Shorter area routes. He did run a lot of shorter routes, which, it's fine. But, is he going to can he make it to that next level and be a weapon that's also like a downfield weapon as well, and not just in the short area game? Like I said, the blocking, while I liked it, I think it was inconsistent. I should have wrote inconsistent there, a little bit more inconsistent than what we like, especially for his size. Definitely dealt with drops at times. He's able to catch the ball in every which way, but a lot of it's just like mental drops that just you're like, oh, you're supposed to catch that, man. Like, that's a catch. How do you drop that ball? Because then other times he's making these insane catches, and it's like, where are these easy ones you're just kind of missing there? So that was kind of frustrating while watching film on him. And then his hands, he's definitely has smaller hands. It's under 9 inches, something that can be really concerning for a tight end, which is probably part of the reason why there's drops, unfortunately, because smaller hands are not a good thing. But I like Bringstool. I think there's some good abilities to his game there. I really love to see where he's able to develop at and what kind of weapon he can be at the next level, because I do like him a lot. But Coach Tyler, how do you feel about Bringstool?
Yeah, we're just gonna call him Jake because I don't want to have to say that last name.
That's fair. That's fair.
But yeah, Jake Bringstool, we'll say the full name. Jake, he does a lot of things above average, but he doesn't do anything outstanding. And so, there's a lot of traits that teams are going to buy into. There's a lot of, the little things that he does right that teams are going to see and say, hey, we could craft that and make that better. And so I think that that's what's going to boost him anywhere in terms of draft stock is he doesn't do anything, exceptionally well, but he does everything at an above average clip. And, as we've gone through a lot of these guys and talked about him, there has been, some pretty consistent negatives, and even his negatives, blocking, a lot of that is just his size, right? He's a thinner tight end, 6'6", 241. So still in that range of guys that we've been talking about, but he's a little bit on the slimmer side, doesn't have that mass around him, but he has shown an ability to be a capable blocker. He does thrive against zone defenses. He is a very much IQ player over just, outstanding athlete in terms of getting open. He definitely knows how to manipulate a zone very well and knows how to manipulate defenders within those zones. And I think teams are going to really enjoy that about him. I don't think that he is a starter at the next level anytime soon. Give it 2-3 years. Maybe we'll be having a different conversation. Maybe he really boosts those things up. But as of right now, I see him as maybe, a 2 tight end set guy, if that, if not just a tight end 2 or a tight end 3 on a team, and, fighting for those spots up. But he has that ability as he, matures and grows in the game to prop himself up to those, next echelons within the tight end ranks.
I like it. Yeah, I'm really excited to see where he lands at, because I think landing spot will be a really interesting thing for him. So, all right. This is one of your guys here, Coach Tyler, that you requested here. Jalin Conyers, right? Am I saying it? Conyers. Thank you. Jalin Conyers, tight end out of Texas Tech. I wonder why we chose him. Conyers, summarize him real quick here, thinking size, athletic traits. There's the 2 big things I noticed off the bat there. will be here. This past season, he had 30 receptions, 320 yards receiving, 5 touchdowns. Fortunately for him, he will be 24 by the start of the NFL season. A little older among a lot of these prospects. But he did tie for the best testing at the NFL Combine and on my rankings. 121 broad jump, 4.27 shuttle. So he really came and brought it. He was one of the better testers in terms of the testing scores that I gave out. He was tied for the best. When you're looking at this guy, ball skills, adjustments, contested catches. Really strong tight end out there. Can bring in a lot of balls that he's being heavily covered. Knows how to make adjustments to the ball. A lot of things watched on film, watching him be able to find the ball and make the adjustment to it. Was his quarterback threw it to him, and he just has the ball skills to be a really good pass catching tight end at the next level there. He does a lot of good things that you want to see in him. On the negative side, short area quickness. Definitely a guy that doesn't really have that short area burst to his game there. Again, more of like a long speed kind of guy in my eyes. Age, obviously, an inconsistent factor there. Obviously, don't like that. Hate to see that a prospect's already 24 years heading the league, which again, can absolutely still be a star, but it's not going to be as long lived. And then inconsistency. While watching him on film, like there were times he looked really good watching him, and then there are other times it just was kind of like it wasn't like. It was very inconsistent for me too much, and that's kind of why I have him ranked a lot lower than a lot of these guys. And the age for me is also another factor that I just don't like in terms of a prospect. But Coach Child, I know you really like this guy, or at least you like him because he went to Texas Tech. But I'll let you talk about him now. So
a little bit of both. Yeah, obviously, watch this guy play. I was very excited to get him in the transfer portal, but. One, I will say extremely underutilized by our offensive coordinators at Kitley, former offensive coordinators at Kitley. So we'll never forgive him for that. But, Coyers is a little bit shorter, but a lot more stout than a lot of the guys that we've talked about today. A lot running in that 6'5", 6'6", 240 to 250 range. And Coyers measured in at 6'3.5", 260. So a lot more stout than those guys in terms of his build. But like you said, had an outstanding combine in terms of those who tested. Obviously, some of those more elite guys didn't test. I don't know how he falls within those ranks if we have the Tyler Warrens and the Colston Lovelands test in that. But if you look, he scored a 9.24 relative athletic score at the combine. And so he has, the athletic ability in terms of the athletic testing, right? According to Kent Lee Pat, who, created the relative athletic score, he ranked as the 94th out of 1,216 tight ends from 1987 to 2025. So he's not bad in terms of his athletic testing. And I really put him as a very, very cheap sleeper Tyler Warren replacement. Right? We looked at Tyler Warren, and one of the biggest things for him was his utilization, right? He was able to, obviously go out at tight end, but he would come in at fullback. He would go in and take wildcat snaps, right? You go watch Coyers on tape, he's doing the exact same thing, right? He played quarterback in high school, so we have, even passing. I think he had only one, but we have passing touchdowns through both his time at Arizona State and Texas Tech. As a tight end, we have multiple direct snap rushing touchdowns where he's going, and then you have him going downfield, right? You have him adjusting to the ball. You have him making those contested catches. And there's a lot of polish that he'll need in terms of his route running, in terms of that short area quickness, right? He has some fairly decent speed, 4.7, 4.40, not the most blazing 40 in the world for a tight end, but also not, terrible. He wasn't running a 4.9 or 5. But as he works downfield, he's able to accelerate up to that speed that gets him separation, the separation that he needs. He has the ability to, get downfield after the catch. He's, a former quarterback that has gone in at every position for Texas Tech. And so he's able to, read a field very well. And, with both his vision and his size, go make plays against guys in the open field. But there are definitely things that are going to need to be polished. A lot of that route running, he needs to obviously focus on different growth areas, but even undersized height-wise at 6'3.5", which again, crazy saying that's undersized. He already has the weight and the hand size, 9 7/8 inch hands, 33 1/4 inch arms. He doesn't lose anything on the wingspan or hand size, being a couple inches shorter than the rest of the guys that we talked about. But his versatility and his ability, even if it wasn't fully showcased with his Texas Tech film, even if you go back to his Arizona State film, he's a guy that is a very deep sleeper for me. Probably a guy that's going to end up on some of my taxi squads just because he went to Texas Tech. And I'm not saying that this is not partially a homer pick, like Coach Steve said, but at the same time, it's a homer pick because I've seen this guy play and I've seen what he's capable of doing. And I think that under the right coaching and utilization, he could grow to at least be within, a 2 tight end set consistent player underneath. But also, be a Taysom Hill type player where, he's just kind of utilized even as a gadget guy all over the field and makes a name for himself that way. So he's a very deep sleeper for me. He's not, anywhere within my top 8 tight ends. But if you've got the waiver wire open after your draft, you're one of those 5 to 7 round rookie draft guys, take a shot on Coyers at the end. And if I'm wrong, you can come back and yell at me in the comments. But I liked watching this guy. He's a guy that I see a lot of potential in. And, that's what it's going to be as of right now, is a lot more potential than anything. But, I'll make a push for him to even be on that deep sleeper list for you if you're looking to add some very late round tight ends.
Love it. Love the breakdown on Converse. So I appreciate that, Coach Tyler there. I love that. You got that Texas Tech insight there. So that's why we have you on the show. So, but we are actually going to wrap things up here, guys, because we are going a little overtime now at this point. But I'm just going to name off some of the other guys here real quick. So in case you're, looking for other tight ends to hear about, just keep your eyes on for the NFL Combine. These are some other ones. Again, I kind of personally like. Just going to run through them real quickly here. Thomas Fidone, tight end of Nebraska, really did really well at the NFL Combine. Interesting to see where he ends up at the next level. So it's a name to remember. Come on. Oh, I guess I got rid of the other ones there. But it was also Gavin
Bartholomew.
Gavin Bartholomew. Thank you. I still said his name wrong. Michigan tight end out of Pittsburgh, if I'm not mistaken there. Good size tight end for blocking. And then Mitchell Evans, combo tight end out of Notre Dame here. So remember those names when watching the NFL Combine. See if they end up in decent spots as well. Again, we'll talk about them if they get drafted. So we're not going to go in too deep to these guys because they may or may not get drafted. We'll have to wait and see. But this is a really good tight end class. So these are also great names to remember about when that time frame comes. But Coach Tyler, anything you want to say before I wrap us up for the night?
Yeah, go check out Dynasty Nerds. That's where me and Coach Steve met. That's how I got on here, started talking with him about all this, and that's how we brought you the stuff today. And, a lot of the film that we're watching, everything that we're going through, we get from the Dynasty Film Room over there, the All-22 that the editors are putting up for really any prospect that you would want to see. Is over there. So y'all go check out dynastynerds.com. Use code COACH when you get over there. And thank y'all so much for listening.
Absolutely, guys. We appreciate you guys for tuning in, whether it's live on our YouTube channel, which we highly encourage. Read my comment, please. All right, let's see here. Great stuff from Coach. Not Coach. I keep on wanting to call you Coach Dog, Fantasy Dog. Great stuff. Like, subscribe, will comment. Love it. We appreciate that there. We always appreciate our subscribers for joining in on the show because we do this for free. We like to just give you guys great fantasy advice that we go out our way and do. So we really do appreciate you guys jumping on, especially you, Fantasy Dog. And again, we'll be back next Monday. Next Tuesday would have been April Fool's, so that would have been April Fool's for you. But next Monday, we will be getting into some running backs. So we've got a 2-part series on rookie running backs because there's so many goddamn running backs to talk about. We will have a guest on next week's show, so tune in for that. But, thank you guys all for listening, guys, and tune in until next time all. And we'll see you guys next month.